All right. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our today's Garden and Country Extension webinar. Our topic today is solar energy. Our presenter is going to talk about some of the components and off-grid uses and rooftop options that I've asked for. And this is the University of Arizona, Gila County Cooperative Extension. Just a little bit about these webinars. This is a weekly Zoom webinar. It will be 60 minutes or less, done Thursdays at 11 a.m. Arizona time. It features a variety of horticultural and natural resource topics relevant to the environmental conditions and residential concerns of Gila County and anybody else who finds that of interest. Recording of this we posted at this website, extension.arizona.edu/Gila. And I'm pleased that we've been doing this for about a month now, and I've got the previous webinars all up and ready to be seen. And the University of Arizona is an equal opportunity affirmative action institution. Our agenda here today, thank you for joining us early and getting on right now. Just a little bit of a login and lag time here. I'm your moderator, Chris Jones, doing the welcome. At 11:05, or when I'm done with this little opening portion, Ed Franklin will come on to talk about today's topic on solar energy. I may give some brief updates after that. It'll be a 30-minute presentation. I'll provide the evaluation link, which is already in the chat box for you all. We'll open that up for some question and answer discussion with Ed, and if we perhaps an opportunity for some open discussion, but we'll definitely wrap up before noon at 11:59 is sharp, or beforehand, just depending on the number of questions. This is today's speaker, Dr. Edward Franklin. He is Associate Professor at the Department of Agricultural Education at the University of Arizona, and has been making solar energy education a large part of his programming for several years now. And I'm going to stop the share here. And I believe, Ed, you can pull up the share screen and put your slide up.
Okay, let's see. Oops. I'm trying to move this over here. Okay, whoops. There we go. Okay, are you seeing it?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
I think you're going to put it all set to go.
Okay.
I'll mute myself and maybe even just put.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to share information with the folks today. And so we're going to talk a little bit about solar energy, specifically addressing off-grid uses and talking about components of systems. And then we'll also go into rooftop options for solar systems. I'm with the Department of Agricultural Education and Technology Innovation, so we actually went through a name change last year. So the objectives, what I want to cover today, we'll cover a little bit about types of PV systems. We're going to go in depth more on standalone system components and batteries. I want to take you through the steps to designing a standalone system, and with a couple of examples of two of the steps. And then we'll finish up with roof mounting systems for residential. So there are different types of solar PV systems that are out there on the market, and it depends on basically what your particular need is that'll help you drive you to what your system that you select. So the simplest system out there is called PV Direct, or a direct coupled PV system. And we have an illustration here, and this is from the Florida Solar Energy Education Center. And it's basically is that we have a solar module and it's matched up with our load. And our load is going to be a direct current load. So a direct current load is anything that could be powered by a battery. So if we think of it like that. Here are some examples of PV direct system loads. In agriculture, solar water pumping is probably the one we see the most out there. We can also see solar powered attic ventilation systems. And that kind of makes sense because we want the ventilation fan working during the hottest part of the day, and that's usually during the day. And so if we have a solar module hooked up to the fan and it runs during daylight hours, that's great. Again, a PV direct system has no energy storage component to it. Okay, so these are not going to work at night, or they may not work very well in low light conditions. Okay, it's a very simple system. The module is matched to the load. Here we have a DC light connected to a very small solar cell, and then we have a solar powered pump that could be used outside for a fountain. The most prevalent system, or what we're going to see the most in Arizona, is going to be our grid connected PV system. And this is what you're going to see on houses in your neighborhoods. And many of you may have a grid connected system. When you have a solar array on the roof, it's connected to an inverter or power conditioner, and that's changing that DC to AC current. And then you have a distribution panel in your house. So you may have a couple of breakers in that distribution panel that's actually pulling that AC from the inverter. And then you're going to supply it to your house. And then whatever you're not using, it's going to be sent to your electrical utility. And so this is a great way for you to reduce your electricity costs because you're able to pull power, produce power, use for yourself. And then whatever you're not using, it's going to the grid. And depending on where you're located and who your energy provider is, you may have some type of rebate, you may have some type of payback system. So here's some examples. We're looking at houses that have solar modules up on top of them. These are in residential areas, so we're going to guess that they're actually grid connected systems and not necessarily off the grid. We also have multi-modal or hybrid systems, and this is where we're using not only the solar photovoltaic system produce energy for us, but we're storing the energy. So we may have a battery system, and then we may also have a backup system. So here we see we could have a generator, we could have a wind turbine. This could be a grid backup. We could have micro hydro. So this would be in a system, again, maybe out a ways in a rural area where we have some critical loads where we've got to have energy required. If you're up in the northern part of the state, Flagstaff, where you may get some inclement weathers and partial sun, where you're not generating enough energy to store in your batteries, you may wind or rely on a wind turbine or maybe a propane powered generator to provide juice to your batteries until your solar system is operating again. Here are some examples. The one on the left here is actually a picture of the Star School, which is the first off-grid renewable energy powered school, and it's actually located in Loop, Arizona. And so they have both solar and wind. So it's an example of a multimodal system. And then we're going to focus on standalone, or AKA battery-based systems. So what we have here is we have our photo array, we have a charge controller, we have our battery-based system or batteries. If we're producing for AC electricity in our home, then we're going to need an inverter. If we're running just on direct current loads, we could have lights, you could have some appliances that are strictly DC, then you're not going to need the use of inverter. But this is very typical of a standalone battery-based system. So where are standalone PV systems used? We're seeing more and more of them in our society. Some of you may have landscape lighting in your front yard or backyard, and so you have lighting along the walkway, has a solar cell, there's a battery in it, there's also a photocell, so the photocell detects when the sunlight's gone down, and then it switches on your battery, and that battery's operating these lights. So we see more and more of this in landscapes. Train crossings are using solar systems and batteries to power the lights. Traffic monitoring systems, speed systems in communities are now relying on a solar system with a battery to provide energy to the load. We can see motion detectors that we can use around our house that are, again, are charged with the battery is being charged with a solar cell. We're seeing more and more communities in the rural areas adopting the use of solar to charge batteries for LED lights, for street lamps. And you know, we're saving money there because we're not having to trench up large areas of ground and running electrical conduits. We're able to do this at each pole. So this is, again, becoming something we're seeing more and more in our rural areas. If you have livestock, horses, cattle, and you have a hot wire to keep them in the fences, you might have a hot wire system that's run on a battery. And then we see something very simple like a calculator. So these are examples of very small standalone PV systems. The simplest system is going to power what we call a DC load. And again, that's any load that could be powered by a battery. And the simplest system will have a solar PV module or array. We'll have a charge controller. We'll have a battery and a DC load. So in this particular illustration here, we have a 20-watt solar module. We have a charge controller rated for up to 10 amps of electrical current. We have a storage battery. This one happens to be about 7.5 amps. And then our load here is actually a bilge pump. It's in the bottom of a bucket and it's powering a fountain. So this is a very simple system, a very simple load system. The charge controller here is the brains of the outfit. It monitors how much power is coming in and going to the battery. It protects the battery from being overcharged. And this particular little charge controller here can detect when the battery volume or voltage is going down to a certain point, and it'll actually turn off the load. And it has little LED lights so the person can see where it's at in terms of charging the battery. Here's another version of this type of system. We use this one for teaching in our laboratory situations. So we have a demonstration board. This has a DC load center. So I have a breaker here for the solar module. I have another breaker controlling the battery, and then I have another one for the load itself. So this board, we could actually put a lamp holder on it, put a DC lamp. In this particular example, we took it off and we connected the solar fountain to it. So this is a sealed rechargeable battery. It's a solar deep cycle battery. And then here's our demo board. Here we have our 20-watt solar module connected to our charge controller and then our load. So again, if we take a look at this solar charge controller, we see that we have two leads coming into the charge controller. This is from our solar, so we have our positive and negative lead. And then we have two that are going to our battery, our positive and negative, and then we have two going to our load. In this case, it's a DC load. And then the LEDs tell us the state of charge of the battery. So red saying we have a very low battery, it'll automatically disconnect the load till the battery is charged enough up into the yellow, and it'll actually re-engage and the load will come back on again. And then we have a LED that's a charging, saying if we have the modules actually in the sun and it's sending electric current to the charge controller. Here we have a very, very simple system. If my goal is I want to charge a battery, maybe this battery is going to be used on a boat or in a vehicle. How do I charge it? Again, the important thing here is to have what we call the charge controller installed in between. The battery does not have the ability to tell the PV module it's full. So if we connected this PV module to the battery without having a charge controller in between, we'll damage our battery. All right, so the charge controller, and I'll tell my students, it's like my wife when I go to a buffet. My wife is the one that says, Ed, you've had enough to eat. Stop. Okay, so she's my charge controller. Otherwise, I'll just keep eating and eating, and I'll feel the effects afterwards. So the charge controller here, again, serves to monitor how much energy is going into the battery, the state of charge of the battery when it's full. And so when the battery is full, it'll automatically disconnect the solar PV module, so it's not damaging it. Here we have a standalone system. It's a little more complex because we've added AC. And this is a system we put together. It's a design that we replicated from New Mexico State University. It's a demonstration system that we can roll it around, take it outside, and we put solar modules on the back of these poles on the top side. This is inside the building right now, but this system would have 2 solar modules or array. We have the charge controller here connected on the board. We actually have batteries in the cabinet. Here we have an inverter, and the role of the inverter, again, is to change the DC electrical current to AC, so we can use it for AC loads. We have a load center here. This is our DC load center. It's a disconnect. This is disconnecting our modules off the system. We have a battery disconnect here, so I can isolate the batteries from the system on a safety purpose. Here I have an AC disconnect, and this is an actual lighted sign. It's an LED light up sign. We can program it so that it runs on AC. This light up above is actually a DC light, so it's actually controlled here by our DC charge controller. And then I have an AC load center that will control the AC duplex receptacle here on this board, which I'm going to plug in a lamp or a fan or something like that, maybe a battery charger or pencil sharpener. And then I have a meter here that'll tell me the state of charge of my battery. So this is a demonstration system we put together. These 2 meters here will show us the amps and the volts being produced by the solar system. So we can see if we're out under full sun, are we getting full voltage and amperage from our array. So again, the more things we're going to try to run, especially if we're doing AC and DC, it becomes more of a complex system. And things are matched up based on the size of our system. So I'm going to talk a little bit about charge controllers. Again, they work as voltage regulators. They prevent the battery from being overcharged by the solar array. So that's their primary purpose. Some units will prevent the battery from being overly discharged by the load. So some of these charge controllers have that as an option, and that might be something you want to look for if you're trying to set up a small system. If you can look for that low voltage disconnect option on a charge controller, it'll save you on your battery. Again, it monitors the state of charge of the battery, and we're going to talk a little bit about that coming up. And these are available in many different sizes, from a few amps up to about 80 amps. And once you get above 80 amps in a system, then you can look at getting multiple controllers and having subarrays. And so again, the system gets a little more complex depending upon how much of your energy needs. The 2 most popular types of charge controllers, one called PWM, or pulse width modulation, and the other is called multiple power point tracking. And I'm going to go through those here briefly. So these are examples of PWM, pulse width modulation. They're the most common that we're going to see out there. They are the least expensive types. The one on the left here from Sunsaver, this is a 10 amp. This one below it is a 20 amp. Here we have a 15 amp. And we have 30 amps. So they come in various sizes. You look at what are the needs of your system, and you can size your charge controller based on what you plan to power. When the battery reaches a full state of charge, it rapidly switches the full charging current on and off. The length of charging current pulse actually decreases as the battery voltage increases. And it can disconnect the load when the voltage drops in the battery. So this one's designed for a system where if I have a 12-volt system, I'm going to have maybe a 17, 18-volt module, and I'm going to have the voltage module pretty much sized to my batteries. So that's what PWM controllers are used for. So it has a maximum input voltage that we're going to use, and then maximum output. The other type of charge controllers are MPPT, which are maximum power point controllers. They're a little more expensive, but they allow us to use larger solar arrays, and we can actually make use of larger amounts of solar voltage. So Midnight Solar is one maker. Here's another one. It's EP Ever. You can find these online. You can get them out of Amazon. You can get them from different vendors. And again, they are all sized based on what you need in the system. I think this MPP controller here on the left is actually for about 30 amps. And this Midnight Solar one, it's a little bit higher than that. So the MPPT tracks the maximum power point of the array throughout the day. If you are familiar with maximum power point on a solar array, there's the highest point of the system. It's looks like a knee curve on the IV curve, and it's up on the far right-hand side, and that's where the maximum voltage and current come together. And of course, over the course of the day, that's going to adjust as cloud cover comes in. And so the MPPT actually tracks it across the day, and it allows us to use more voltage without losing any power. So that's the advantage of the MPPT controller over the PWM, is we're able to maximize the amount of power we're producing, and we don't lose that voltage. So the benefits depends on operating temperatures of the array, state of charge of a battery. So we know that colder days we can get higher voltage production from our solar array, and that means there's a higher difference between the array and battery voltage. The MPPT realizes that, and we can actually capture and use more of that voltage where the PWM doesn't allow us to do so. So we get more potential power out of it. And then an MPPT contributes to the average energy gain of about 10%. So there's an advantage of selecting an MPPT over the PWM. It's going to cost you a little more, but again, depending on the size of the system you're putting together, you want to maximize as much power coming out of that array as you can. Probably the most expensive part of a system is going to be your batteries. This is your component for actually storing energy. We're actually going to be building banks of batteries depending upon the size of our system. If we wire our batteries in series, and that's where we're wiring positive to negative, we're actually increasing our voltage. And if we're trying to increase the amount of amp hours coming out of our batteries, then we wire in parallel. So there's different ways in which we can actually connect our batteries. And so this diagram here is a configuration. We want to come up with 12 volts. We're using two 6-volt batteries. We wire in series, so we see that we have a positive lead from one battery being connected to the negative lead of the other battery, and then the other two leads coming out, the positive and negative. This is going to give us 12 volts, wiring in series. Here on this other diagram, we have a 12-volt configuration wired in parallel. So each of the batteries produces 12 volts. We have the negative of one battery connected to the negative of another. We have the positive of one battery connected to the positive of the other, and then we have the two leads going out to the system. So what we're doing here is we're actually increasing the amp hours of the battery. So let's say that each of these batteries was putting out 10 amp hours. I would be getting 20 amp hours with this parallel configuration. Here are some examples of different types of solar batteries. We have some, in this battery banks down below, these are our flooded lead acid battery. These are very common in the market. They're probably the least expensive for the consumer, but they also require maintenance. So if you're looking at putting in a standalone system for yourself and you'd like to go to the lead acid option, be prepared. This is the ones where the owner has to go in and actually monitor the batteries and service the batteries. So you're going to be checking to see how much distilled water you have and having to actually monitor the batteries. If you're one that do not want to do that step, then you can move over to some other types of batteries. We have the gel, we have the AGM, and these are non-maintenance or maintenance-free batteries. They're going to cost you a little more to purchase, but again, you're saving the time. If you're not going to go in and maintain them, then you certainly use this as an option. Then we also have the sealed rechargeable batteries. So there's some different options that are out there, and I'll go into these in a little more detail. The big thing is going to be the cost, as well as how long they're going to last. If you are on a battery bank, you can see the enclosures here is something else you have to look at. Batteries are going to be giving off gas, and so we got to make sure that we've got them located in an area where it's safe. It's away from where we're residing, maybe out into a shed, or some people will even put them under the decking of their house. And again, but they need to be accessible so you can get to them. And then you may have to insulate the box so we're preventing them from getting too hot or too cold. So what are the kinds of solar batteries? We have basically dry cell and wet cell batteries. Your dry cell are your AAA, AA, A, C, and D type batteries that we use in our electronics, and our wet cell is typical of a 12-volt car battery. We have primary batteries, and these are the ones that we use once. So if you have an alkaline battery that you use in some type of electronic and then you toss it away when the voltage is low, that's a primary battery. And our car batteries are also considered primary batteries, because once they give up their charge or all of their cycling, we have to replace them. And usually it's over just a period of years. So those are considered primary batteries. Secondary batteries is a class of rechargeable batteries. So you can buy rechargeable batteries for your power tools, for example. These are deep cycle batteries, type that are used in golf carts, are also called secondary batteries. So your lithium batteries that are using in your power tools, those are rechargeable. It's considered a secondary battery. The deep cycle batteries, they're able to take the repeated discharge and recharging cycle. The manufacturers will say not to discharge below 50% of the state of charge of a battery. So we're going to talk a little bit about state of charge. A battery, when we get it new, hopefully it's at 100% state of charge. And as we start drawing energy off of it, that state of charge drops off. And so in a deep cycle battery, the manufacturer suggests that we don't take it below 50%. And so that needs to be figured into design, because that means we're only taking it down 50%, bringing it back up. That means I'm going to have twice as many batteries, because I don't want to take it down to a lower depth of discharge, for example, 80%. Because what happens then, we limit the number of life cycles of the battery or a battery bank. This is a graph that shows you a battery cycle graph. It's a cycles versus depth of discharge. So what we see here along the left side would be the cycles. How many life cycles in a battery? We could go from 100 up to 10,000. And then across the top here, we have state of charge of our battery. 100% would be a battery that's fully charged, and 0 state of charge. And opposite that would be the depth of discharge. So if I have a battery that's 100% state of charge, that means it has 0% depth of discharge. We haven't used anything, right? And as we start using energy out of that battery, let's say it drops down to 80% state of charge, that means I've used 20% depth of discharge, okay? So if we take the 20 and 80 and add them together, that's 100%. Some of our battery design systems may recommend that we don't take the batteries below 30% or as low as 50%. So if I'm only taking my battery system down 30%, meaning there's still 70% of charge. So what this line shows us here is that the lower I take my batteries down, the depth of discharge, let's say if this battery here, I take it down to 70% and I come right to this line here where it intersects and I go across, that means now the number of cycles is reduced probably to about 750 cycles. So the lower I take my battery depth of discharge, I am now lessening the number of cycles that my batteries have. So if I only go down to a 90% state of discharge here, according to this chart, I have 5,000 cycles. If I take this battery down to almost 100% depth of discharge, I'm now down to under 500 cycles. So hopefully that makes sense to folks out there looking at it, okay? So we have to look at that, the relationship between the number of cycles and depth of discharge. So looking at different types of deep cycle batteries, the flooded lead acid, the lowest upfront cost, the one that's most available out on the market. It's been around for one of the longest length of time. It does require maintenance, but the typical lifespan can be anywhere from 5 to 7 years. So again, we're talking about the most expensive part of our system. And if we're replacing batteries every 5 to 7 years, again, that can cost us quite a bit of money and again, time. The next option would be the sealed lead acid, the absorbent glass mat or gel. They're a little more expensive. They are maintenance free. And again, their typical lifespan is only 3 to 5 years. So we're not getting as much out of it. But then again, I'm not having to go out there and maintain it. So you have to look at what your options are, how much I'm going to be replacing these batteries for a long length of time, and how much I have to invest. The lithium, which are the new ones, have the most expensive upfront costs. They're maintenance free, but the typical lifespan is 10 years and longer. So someone may go, wow, great, I'm going to invest there. But once we talk a little bit about costs, again, that may be something, again, you have to weigh into your consideration. Batteries come in different size voltages. There's actually 2 volt, 4 volt, 6 or 12 volt batteries. The selection is based on your system voltage. So a 12 volt system is a very small system. It's maybe for components that we're using in a standalone system in our yard if we're putting lights on or we have a very small system. 24 volt systems, pretty typical for small cabins. And then 48 volt systems is what we're going to see for off-grid systems for houses and homes. So the type of system voltage is going to vary, but 24 and 48 are going to be more common for people who are living off-grid. The 2 volt batteries can have the highest amp hour capacity. So you might say, I'm going to look at 2 volt batteries because they have the highest amp hour capacity. But if I'm going to get to 48 volts, you can see right there, you know, I've got to have how many batteries to get to 48 volts. Okay, so you can do the math there, 48 divided by 12. I'm going to have 24 2 volt batteries just to get to 48 volts. So you start building this battery bank in this design. And again, it's all depend on how much energy you actually use. Amp hours, this is the capacity of our battery. It varies with each battery. The range can be from 550 amp hours to 2,550 amp hours. And an amp hour is how much electrical current and amperage you're using per hour. So here's some examples. Here's a flooded lead acid battery. It's a 2 volt, has 700 amp hours. The actual weight of this battery is 105 pounds, and the cost is $615. So this is a battery you have to maintain. But if I've got 2 volts batteries, I'm going to have 24 of these in a bank so I can get to a 48 volt system. And you know, we would wire them all in series, first of all, to get up to 48 volts, and then we could actually have more of these wired in parallel so we can actually increase our capacity. So you can think about, boy, the weight of these, if I had to move you know, 24 of these around, that's quite a bit of weight. And again, you look at the cost on the front end, $615. Here's an absorbed glass mat, also in a 6 volt. This one has 390 amp hours, 133 pounds the weight, $557. And I'll show you one of the websites where we got some of this information from. Here's a lithium. This one is 100 amp hour, 1,280 watt hours. Very lightweight, but again, look at the cost, $900 for this battery. And this one's a 12.8 volt. Here's a flooded lead acid in a 24 volt, 1,375 amp hours. Look at the weight, 2,200 pounds. And then the actual cost, $9,000. So this is more on a, maybe more on a commercial side or on a very large system. So again, giving you an idea a little bit about the costs and what it's going to take to actually put these together. And here's the lithium, 48 volts, 130 amp hours. This one has 192 pound, $6,000 on the cost of it. So examples of some battery banks, the one on the right here, again, these are all 2 volt batteries and they're all connected, positive to negative. We see the red from the one connected, the black of the other. So we're actually building system voltage here. So these are 2 volts, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. So this is a 24 volt system. And then this is a system that's actually 48 volts. It's actually in a metal container, has to be moved around by a pallet. This is actually taking a picture at the Star School, and there are actually, I think, 4 of these banks right there in their battery room, and this is what they use to power their K-8 school. So if we're going to design a system, there's actually 6 steps. The first step is that you actually have to determine what your electrical load estimation is. And so if, you know, somebody says, hey, I want to move off grid, you know, what it's going to cost me. Well, first of all, we got to figure out how much energy do you actually use? And is it just one person? Is it 2 people? Is it a small family? How often do you use it? the place? Is this just going to be a cabin that you go up on the weekends, or are you going to be living in this year round? The second thing is then looking at battery sizing, how many batteries and the size of the batteries you're going to need. The third step is your solar array sizing, how many modules you're going to use and the size of the modules. The step 4 is the controller specifications, how big the controller is going to be. Step 5 is your inverter. And then step 6 is system wiring sizing. We're going to cover a little bit on electrical load. I'm going to go a little more detail on battery sizing. And the other ones, are topics that could be brought up at another time. What I want to do is show you, this is an off-grid load calculator, and I've got this linked. Whoop, maybe I didn't get that linked. Okay. Come here. Okay, so this is an off-grid load calculator. You can find them from a lot of different renewable energy vendors. This one happens to be from Northern Arizona Wind and Sun.
Ed, we didn't get it showing.
Oh, is it showing or is it not?
No, it's not. It's not up yet. So
okay.
Go back into your share screen and let's see if we can get it to switch over.
Okay, let me see.
Or you might close out and come back in if you need to.
Let me see if it's. Let's see.
There it is.
Okay, all right, sorry about that. So this is linked. This is solar-electric.com. This is the Northern Arizona Wind and Sun site. They're located up in Flagstaff. And so this is an off-grid load calculator. And what you can do, they've got a list here of all of these different appliances. And so you can select the appliance. It'll give its rated wattage. That's the amount of power it's using. You can determine the quantity, how many you're using. It'll put in the number of watts. You can determine how many minutes that you would use per hour, the hours per day, the days per week. And what you're basically going to come up with is the total average watt hours per day. So that's what we're looking for. So we need to do a total load estimation. So let's go down through here and I'll just show you how to use this. Okay, so I've got a coffee maker. I'll put that on there. The coffee maker shows up. I have one. This one's rated at 1,050 watts. Maybe it's on for 1 hour a day, but I use it 7 days a week. So it's automatically going to do the calculation and say, all right, I've got 1,050 watt hours. I may have, let's see, what else can we throw in here? Okay, maybe I have one ceiling fan. I've got a personal computer. Again, I'm just scrolling down here and looking at whatever looks like it's going to fit. I've got, let's say I've got incandescent bulbs and I've got some of those in there and I clicked on that. So maybe I'm going to run 3 incandescent bulbs. Okay. And so it'll do the math. Maybe those bulbs are on a little longer during the day. So maybe I have them on for 3 hours a day. My computer, if I'm at home and during this whole pandemic, that computer might be on 7 hours a day, right? So I'm going to switch that over to 7 hours. Okay, so you can see what you're doing here. You're generating out your total load consumption, and it's going to be in total average watt hours per day. Now, watts, again, is the amount of power that your load is actually consuming or using, right? And we're taking voltage times amps, and that's what equals our watts. So in our house, we're usually working with 110 to 120 volts. And if we take our wattage and divide it by those volts, we can see how much actual amperage we're actually using. So you can go through here and actually add additional loads to it. You can see things that use a lot of energy. For example, look at that air conditioner down here, 3,500 watts. And that's a central AC, an air conditioner, a unit, 1,500 watts. Your electric water heater over here, 5,000 watts. Those are things you want to avoid, okay? Because they're going to eat up so much of your energy. Your system is going to be huge. So I would use, propane heaters. I would do what we call load shifting. If I have to heat my off-grid residence, maybe I'm going to look at a wood pellet stove versus trying to use something electric, because I'm going to use so much energy going to those appliances that I'm going to have some issues when I need to use that energy. So we'd put this together first, and you'd come up with whatever a total. And again, it's going to vary based on the household, how many people are in your house. And again, what are your habits? Do you turn on the TV? Is it on 8 hours a day? Do you leave lights on? Do you have a lot of phantom loads? Now, phantom loads are any electrical devices that use electrical energy that use a little bit of the time, but we don't pay attention to them. So examples of a phantom load, for example, might be your electric range, and it has a clock. Your coffee maker that has a clock is programmable. Your microwave oven that has a clock, even though the microwave's not turned on, but that clock is using a little bit of energy. If you have a flat screen TV and it's on a remote control, okay, that is a phantom load because the TV is still consuming a little bit of energy. Probably the one that people don't pay attention to, but they have it on all the time, is your Wi-Fi router. Not many of us turn our Wi-Fi router off at night or when we leave. It's normally on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's, again, it uses a little bit of energy, but every day. So those are things we need to look at and take count of when we start estimating our loads. I'm going to jump back into our PowerPoint here. Let's see where I was at, system design. Okay. There we are. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint again? Do I need to share that?
You still need to share that, not up yet.
Okay, here it is. Gotcha. Okay. There.
Now, perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, so again, we look at doing our estimation of our loads. Again, understanding that batteries can be the most expensive component of the system. And so the number of batteries we select and the type is going to be dependent upon our loads. So again, we know we have different options of batteries, the types of batteries, maintenance free versus the lithium for the length of time. A lot of it's going to be our type, our voltage, again, capacity and amp hours, and our cost. So we've already said that we're going to look at our total electrical load, and we've already looked at that. There's some other variables we want to consider. There are a lot of them that are listed here. One of them is inverter efficiency. So if I have an inverter, nothing is going to be 100% efficient in a system like this. So we have to account for these losses. Typically, we'll use 0.90 or 90% as an efficiency factor for a battery inverter. We have to look at days of autonomy. So this refers to how many days that we expect our batteries to meet our electrical load without it ever being recharged by our PV array. Oops, I'll back that up, I'm sorry. Okay, a rule of thumb is about three days. And depending where you live, it might be 2 to 5 days. In northern Arizona, if I get a lot more storms or I get more cloud cover, maybe I want to go 5 days. That's very conservative. But that means that's going to be a very expensive system in terms of number of batteries. That means I'm depending totally on my batteries for 5 days without having the sun come out. Discharge limit, how far are we going to take energy from our battery before we recharge it? So 50% may be our limit, and that's if we use flooded lead acid batteries. Battery capacity and amp hours, the size of the battery in terms of amount of energy it will store. More amp hours means more energy available in the battery. So the higher the amp hours is what we're looking for. Even on your batteries in your car, right? You get a more expensive battery in your car because it has a higher battery amp hour capacity, which for your car means more cranking power. So if you live in a climate where it gets colder and you depend on the battery to start the car, you usually end up buying a battery with a higher amp hour capacity. Our system voltage, are we running 12 volt, 24, or 48 volt? And that'll be determined by our electrical load demand. And then battery voltage, the voltage of our batteries, are we running 2 volt, 6 volt, 12 volt, or 24? We can build the voltage selecting smaller voltage batteries that have a higher amp hour capacity. We can wire in series. So for example, 12 volt battery may not have enough amp hour capacity. So we select the 6 volt batteries with higher capacity, wire them in series to reach 12 volts. So we do some math here in terms of actually piecing the system together to meet our needs. So let's take a look. This is a battery sizing worksheet. This came from Solar Energy International from one of their worksheets. And we can actually plug in these values and we can come up with an actual total. So I'm going to take you through an example using this battery sizing worksheet. So here's an example. We have a small cabin with 1,000 watt-hour AC electrical load using a 12 volt battery system for 3 days of autonomy. The inverter has an efficiency rating of 90%. There are no DC loads. The maximum depth of discharge for 3 days will be 50%. The battery selected is a 6 volt with 200 amp hours. So how many batteries will be needed for the system? how many are wired in series, how many are in parallel. So we're going to we'll take this information, let's plug it into this chart. And now the one information we don't have is the load, and we'll give that information to you because that could have been found in an earlier worksheet. So let's say the average daily load was 1,000 watts AC. We divide that by inverter efficiency, 0.9. We don't have any DC loads, we're going to add to it. We are going to divide it by our DC system voltage of 12 volts. So again, this is a small system. So the average amp hours per day is 93. That's what we're going to be using per day, 93 amp hours. So I take that 93, I bring it down here on the chart, multiply it by the days of autonomy. Again, that's how many days we want the batteries to be able to provide us power without having to rely on the solar photovoltaic array to recharge it. My discharge limit of 0.50. And then our battery amp hour capacity is 200. Again, we got that by selecting the 6-volt batteries. So it tells us here that I'm going to have to buy 6 batteries in parallel. Okay, or excuse me, I'll need 6 of these batteries wired in parallel, right, to get the amp hour capacity that I'm going to need for 3 days at 50%. My 12-volt system divided by the battery voltage, which is 6. And this will tell me how many batteries I have in series. So we know that, yeah, if I have 2 batteries in series, put them together, that'll give me my 12 volt. And that's what the DC system voltage is looking at. And then I multiply that by the number of batteries in parallel. So I'll need to buy 6 total batteries. So this is actually step 2 that we've walked you through on this particular setup. And again, this is all going to vary based on your total AC loads, the type of battery you're using, again, your days of autonomy and your discharge limit. So you have to look at all these different variables to determine, again, how many batteries you're going to need. So here's a system summary here. 1,000 watt hours daily consumption. We're using the flooded lead acid. The battery bank voltage was 12 volts. We have battery voltage of 6 with 200 amp hours. I'm only going to go down to 50%, dip the discharge, and 3 days of autonomy. So the inverter average was 90%, and I only need 6 batteries. So this is just a simple example of how we could actually size out the batteries in our system. So there's some vendors, if you're looking for some things, Northern Arizona Wind and Sun, obviously, if you're in Arizona and you want to shop locally, you can. I've used them. They're a great vendor. They give great service. You can get free shipping depending upon the size of the dollar value of your order. Alt E-Store, they're from Massachusetts. I've done some business with them. They have a great resource for education. If you go into the Alt E-Store site, and you can find videos and some blogs. So a lot of good information there, education. Backwoods Solar is where I found a lot of information on batteries. So they'll have all different types of batteries, different sizes and capacities and prices. Wholesale Solar is another site. So these are ones that I have looked at and I've used, and are very user-friendly. And they'll even, if you want to purchase a system from them, you can reach out to them and they'll help you design a system, or they'll even already have systems put together that if you already know all the numbers that you need, that you can buy a complete system from them. I want to move over to the time we have remaining, roof mounting options for PV. You know, this is a pretty interesting topic in terms of what's available out there. And so there are some different things we have to look at. This is typical of a roof in a neighborhood. This one happens to actually be in El Paso, Texas. And we see that this is in a community. So we're going to say it's a grid mounted system. And you can see that they've used quite a bit of their roof area to actually, they basically filled up the roof as much as they can with solar modules. And so, you know, what you're looking at is the size of your roof. You're looking at how much you can afford, how much you're trying to maybe offset. And maybe this particular house, they're going to offset all 100% of their electrical demand. And so they have a very large system. Some communities, there's restrictions on the placement of your solar modules. For example, I know in California, they have a restriction that you have to maintain a 3-foot spacing all the way around the modules, around the entire part of your roof. And so again, you have to look at what your community regulations are in terms of mounting. This one is right on the roof itself. The rails are, mounted. They're penetrating the roof, and they're connecting here. So you're probably looking at 3 to 4 inch gap underneath the modules to that roof. Here's another one. This was actually in the same neighborhood. So again, this is a south-facing roof, and it's got the peaked roof style. So again, limitations on how much modules you can actually put up there. They're actually using the slope of the roof, that tilt angle. They haven't added anything to it. So they're just relying on that roof angle right there. And we can see they've kind of set up like a little bit of a pyramid fashion where they've taken that top module and actually put it sideways. I haven't seen too many of them set up like that before, but that's how the installer did it. And the homeowner actually said, yeah, let's go with it. Here we see a lower sloped roof. This is in Tucson. It's a lower slope, not quite a flat roof, but again, they've kept it right up to the roof. And this is actually a west-facing house, so they've got this on the west side, but very compact design. They're only using a small portion of the roof of the house. They've got it set back a little bit here from this chimney on the right side, and so yeah, it'd be interesting to see if that shade there ever creeps out across the module. We certainly wouldn't want that to happen. And then of course, looks like they have a roofing vent to the back up here on the left side. And so hopefully maybe, during the early mornings, that's not casting any shade here on this solar array. Here we see another house in Tucson. This was kind of a southwest facing. And what they've done here is they've taken the system and they've tilted up a little bit. And here again, a very large array. We see they've got a place here in the chimney in the back here. And again, this might be a system where they're actually trying to offset maybe 75 or 100% of their total electricity. And their system BOS, or balance of their system, their inverter, everything are all located over here on the north side of the building, so we can actually see it outside. These are tilt up. So if we have a very flat roof or very, very low tilt roof, this is an option. So here, this is in the Tucson area. We have a very flat roof, and we don't want to mount it completely flat on the roof, because then it's only going to maximize production when the sun is directly overhead. And again, depending upon the orientation here, we're going to assume that these are facing towards the east or the south. And so we have a tilt-up design. So it costs a little more for this, but again, our goal is to maximize the output of our solar array. This is a house that actually has an east-facing feature from the front of the house. So this is a tilt-up, very a low-profile roof, or almost near flat roof, and they're going with a tilt-up feature, and these are all facing to the south. And so one of the things the installer needs to look at, and the designer, is how far we're spacing these rows of modules apart, because we certainly don't want to have shade from one row cast on the other row. Otherwise, the system's not going to be functioning properly. So they have to look at inner row spacing and do some calculations there. Here we see another tilt-up design, lower in the front. This is obviously the south-facing roof. They have the modules facing up in the south. Okay, another tilt-up. And then here again, we see one with rows. And this was interesting. I noticed here that here we have this first row, but you see the shade being cast on the second row, and the second row casting on the third row. So it would be interesting to see how that has affected the production of this actual system. Now, if they're using microinverters under their solar modules, then that's not much of an issue, because you're not isolating the entire string, which could happen if you have shading on your roof. This is one where the roof is actually, the front of the house faces to the south, but the roof design is actually east and west facing. So what they did is they put modules on both sides, the east and west, and then tilted them up. And so this one, when I drive by it and I see it, and I look at it, it almost looks like a peacock to me with its feathers up in the back. They're taking advantage of the amount of electricity they can get off of the house. And it's up to you as the owner if that's something you're looking for, and if it helps you in terms of your cutting down your energy costs, it's great. But you also have to look at where you actually live in your neighborhood if this is something that you're going to be able to actually put up. Here's another house or an outbuilding where they've put up some solar modules, and they've actually spaced out the array there. So things to consider on when you're roof mounting, again, site orientation of your house. You know, are you facing north, east, south, or west? The shading from obstacles, you're trying to make sure that you don't have chimneys, you don't have stacks, vent stacks, something from your neighbor's house that might cast a shade during a certain part of the day. What's your roof type and your slope? Do you have a flat roof? Are you using an asphalt shingle roof? Ones I didn't show in this picture and I weren't able to find were any tile roofs. You certainly can have solar put up on a tile roof, but you know that would be something you want to consult with the installer, see what they're experienced with, because they use some different type of equipment. The amount of room for an array, you know, do you want to use the full amount of your roof, or are you only going to put up a little bit because it depends on your budget? How does it appear? And then one thing to consider is the local AHJ or authority having jurisdiction. So you may be living in a neighborhood or an association where they may regulate how much solar you have on your house and how it actually appears from the front. They may not, you know, say you can put up a tilt-up roof system. You maybe have to be flat on the roof. So, you know, those are things to consider. And then the bottom line is always going to be cost. How much can you afford to put up? Up until December 2019, we had a investment tax credit from the feds for about 30%. And so that offset quite a bit of the costs of investing in a solar system. And that went down now. I think it's about 26%. And that's going to continue to drop over the next few years unless the Solar Energy Association and the lobbyists are able to get Congress to extend that. So if you're going to look at investing in a system, that might be something you do now before those costs or the cost of the systems continue to go up. So that's all I have of the presentation there, Chris. And so I guess if there's some questions, I wasn't able to monitor the chat feature. I don't know if anything's coming up on chat.
There is. And Ed, thank you so much for your presentation. Really informative.
Absolutely.
Thanks for getting into some of the rooftop stuff. I'm going to allow this to run over as long as we have people interested in asking questions. This is being recorded, so I'll be able to have that onto the website hopefully next week. I'm getting these things up a little bit faster. I'm on a learning curve. And thanks everybody. Thanks, Ed. I'm going, active in the chat has been a Robert Mason. And Robert, I've got you allowed to speak right now. So if you can, I'll go ahead and unmute you. Or you can unmute. Yeah. So,
are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you're good to go.
Well, thank you for that presentation. It was very nice to see it all concise and in one place.
Thank you.
I read a lot of things on the internet, but I don't know what's true and what's just a sales pitch. So it's really good to see a neutral stance on this, you know, third-party stance.
Well, great. Appreciate that. Did you have a particular question? I think I saw something on the chat. You said something asking about do-it-yourself.
Yes, I have a tile roof,
Okay.
and it's very popular here in Yuma to have solar panels. Is it easy enough to do yourself, or do you have to bring in a contractor?
Well, you know, on the asphalt roof, you can probably get away with it. With the tile roofs, they're a little bit different. They have some mounts that you have to actually physically move your tiles out, get down to the roofing layer, and then install this flashing material. And it has kind of an SJ hook to it in its appearance. And then being able to put the tile back in on there. So it'll elevate the solar modules away from it. I do have a link for a company that actually does that, or I can share you the link, and they have little webinars on how to do it, how it actually works. And you know, we could do, I've got an example of a kit that they sent me so you can see what the materials actually look like. You know, anything with a roof mount, what you want to consider is, you know, your roof warranty. because your warranty of your roof, once you penetrate that roof, it might invalidate your roof warranty. So thinking about when you're doing it yourself or having somebody else come in, they need to make sure that, are they sealing that roof properly once they make that penetration down into, those rafter beams where they're attaching those mounting systems. And if they don't, you want to follow up to make sure that you don't have leaks in your roof after they've made the install.
Okay. Another question that I have is, there's a lot of people that go around in our neighborhood trying to sell us solar panels. Are these people legitimate, or are these people something you should watch out for? Think twice about dealing with.
Yes and no. Some are legit, some are not. One of the first things that they're going to do, if you're going to have anybody come in and do solar with you, is they're going to ask you about how much your electrical loads do you actually use, right? They're going to sit down and you either look at 1 year's worth or maybe 3 years worth of your electrical load, and you can get this from your electric company supplier, so you can see what your total watt hours is. There's a program that you can get for free online. It's called pvwatts.com.
Oh,
Yeah, and so they're going to use that, and they're going to find your house. They'll get your address. They'll plug it in. They'll get a picture of your roof, and they can automatically size out and come up. If you have a meeting and they come meet with you, they're going to do that already, and you can already do it. You can see, well, I know this is how much I can fit on my roof. In terms of where you have vents and things like that. There are companies that are more credible than others. Solar City was one of the largest ones, and they were operating out of Home Depot and things like that. But after that investment tax credit from the Fed dropped from 30%, then a lot of these companies went out of business. And so the ones that are surviving are the ones that, have a lot, are doing a good job. So I would recommend to, hey, I want references. Tell me, give me some information on people who you've worked with, and so you can reach out to them, because if they're legit, they're going to share that with you. They're going to be, proud of the work. If they're not and they're questioning it, then you might want to really think about whether you're going to go with them or not.
Okay. And then leasing them versus owning them. What are the pluses and minuses?
Wow, that's a big thing. I know TEP is doing that here in the Tucson area, where they're saying, lease it, we'll put the system up on your roof, and we guarantee we won't raise your rates, for 25 years. So, yeah, in Arizona we have a utility commission, and all those members of those board are elected officials. And so they work with the utilities. And that's kind of, when you look at Arizona versus some other states, we're not as considered as solar friendly as some of these other states. California has gone to the extreme of renewable energy, and they've even mandated where new housing construction in California will have solar on it. So they've actually gone to that side of it. Other states are very friendly in terms of your net agreements, your interconnection agreements, where they're going to pay you a higher amount of per watt hour of what you're producing versus what you are paying. Some people are paying 12 cents a kilowatt hour, and you have a system and you're sending it, but they may be only crediting you for 2 cents per kilowatt hour. So you want to look at the interconnection agreements if you're going online to, not online, but if you're going to a connection on the grid. But if you're doing your own, system, there are a lot of vendors out there, or sites out there, that'll help you with the design of a system. It's almost that you need to talk to your neighbors to see who's going to help you out. The leasing, I think different companies have different leasing options. I think you have to, again, see who's using them and if it's a value. If you have solar on your roof, obviously I think it adds to the value of your property. And again, that, meeting with a realtor will help you out on that, tell you if it's worth leasing it or putting it up there yourself.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Ed, can you mount these on a manufactured home?
Can you mount it? Yes, you can.
Oh.
Yeah, and some folks put them on RVs. and RV trailers and you know, on boats. So you can, and there is specific mounting tools that you can use for RVs and trailers. Of course, one of the things you got to consider is load limit because of the weight. You know, obviously some manufactured homes may not have the load limit, so you'd have to, you know, spread that out if you can. Otherwise, if you can do a pole mount near where your manufactured home is, you know, the pole mount gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of location and site and size. But, you know, the thing about a pole mount system, if I'm living in in an area that I don't have a very big backyard, then I'm giving up a lot of that space. You know, you could even do a carport, you know, and have solar put on it. So now you're making multiple use. You know, I've got a place to park a vehicle, it's shading, but I'm also producing electricity. So that can, you know, expand the amount of area that you have to actually use it. So you can do it on a manufactured home. I would try to find an installer maybe who has some experience on that, because you're talking about roof penetration. One of the other ways that you can put solar on without penetrating a roof is using what we call a ballast method. And the ballast is actually like a big poly tray. It looks like a big tray, and it actually allows the solar modules to sit on the tray, and they can be bolted to it. And then you actually put cinder blocks in the tray to weight it down. And so those can be used on flat roofs as well.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Ed, if people have some more questions, please go ahead and at least get your name into the chat box, and that way we can get the questions to Ed before we end here. Note in the chat box, I've got the webinar evaluation link there. So if you click on that, it should open up, go directly into your browser and bring that up. It's a short evaluation, should take you a couple of minutes and just helps me get some feedback on these programs. I'm going to bring my slides back up here. And just finish this up with a couple more. Come on. There we go. Just what I mentioned there. There's the link for that evaluation that's in the chat box. We've had our Q&A with Ed. If you have some more questions, I'll get them up here. But I want to let you know that next week is we've got the 4th of July, our Independence coming up. So I'm going to take that as a break on Thursday. So no webinar next week. But I've been talking with my presenters for next month, and I don't have the details all right now. Hopefully I've got those very soon here, but expect to hear, I'm gonna make my gardeners happy. We're gonna talk about compost tea, gonna have a presentation on garden integrated pest management. Our presenter's calling this the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm gonna have a presentation on container gardening, something on post-fire recovery actions, particularly after we've had that bushfire really go over so much of our county this year, and a little bit more on the restoration practices for invasive grasses. Kind of, just try to do some more things we may be able to lower this wildfire risk we've been experiencing lately. It looks like Robert's going to have another question here, so let me see if I can get Robert back up to talk. And if people need to get going, thank you so much. I'll get this posted online, and I think this is our presentation today. So, Robert, go ahead, and you talk some more with Ed here.
So one last question. I know the power output goes down when it's hotter, but does that have any effect on the life of the actual panel itself, or 120-degree heat or whatever? Is that going to reduce the lifespan of the actual panel?
That's a great question. You know, there's the three type of modules that are out there: the monocrystalline, polycrystalline, and the thin films. The thin films are the cheapest to get into, but they're the ones that aren't as durable and rugged as the polycrystalline modules. And those are the ones you're going to see on the market. And you know, they're rated for 25 years warranty on the materials. They'll start losing power production. You can see about 1% decrease each year once you get into, you know, the system using. What I found in our modules out here at the U of A, it's the wires, the rubber coating on the wires and the modules are what usually end up cracking because of the high heat, and depending on how much of a strain that they've been put on when they've installed them. They actually had a set of modules that were put up by TEP years ago in the early 80s, and they're out here at the Campus Ag Center and they're on poles. And there's a couple that are still working. They didn't think they would last that long. And then there's one that the entire module frame fell apart and the entire components fell through the frame. So the high heat doesn't seem to be a big issue as long as you're, you know, if you can go out there and kind of maintain them a little bit by cleaning them off, that might be something that'll obviously help you out in terms of your output. But yeah, as you know, voltage decreases with temperature when it's high heat, and of course when it's colder they go up. So the big thing is then in planning is, you know, saying I know I'm gonna have a voltage drop off because of high heat. I've got to plan for that and maybe add more to modules to my system.
Thank you.
You bet.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I believe I'm going to hit the stop recording here.